Hello and welcome. In this episode of the A to Z of National Bus Company Histories, we have reached M for Maidstone and District. Maidstone and District Motor Services Limited was formed in 1911. The area it operated in was mid to West Kent as well as East Sussex. It took in the busy Medway towns, Maidstone, which is the county town of Kent, Tenderton, Tunbridge, Tunbridge Wells, and Hastings. Its national bus company neighbours were East Kent Road Car Company Limited, Southdown Motor Services, and London Country Bus Services. It was formed as the successor to Maidstone, Chatham, Gravesend and District Motor Omnibus Services. Now, this itself had started operating in 1908 as the Maidstone, Chatham and Gravesend Omnibus Service. By the start of World War I, the company was operating 14 buses, and it's true what they say, isn't it? From tiny acorns, huge oak trees grow. And by this time, the British Automobile Traction Group had acquired a share in the company. Maidstone and District became a Tilling British Automobile Traction Company in 1928, and in 1930, the Southern Railway became a shareholder. Now, I've said it before, but it's strange, isn't it, how all these companies started off almost under the same umbrella, but they split and went in different directions. Some became Tilling companies and some became British Electric Traction companies. And it's always interesting and a little bit fun as well to imagine if companies like Maidstone and District or indeed Southdown had ended up as Tilling companies. And of course the other side of the coin is if companies like Eastern Counties or Lincolnshire, for example, had become BET companies. Tilling Stevens buses, which were built in Maidstone, were very popular in the fleet in the early days, but later on the company would turn to Bristol or Leyland for its chassis. Bodywork by Harrington of Hove was favoured for single-decker buses. In the 1920s, several tramway services were taken over by the company. This started in 1920 when North Kent Motor Services was taken over. North Kent themselves were a subsidiary of the Gravesend and Northfleet Electric Tramways Limited, which was part of the BET group. And in 1929, the Gravesend and Northfleet trams were replaced by Maidstone and District buses. However, this part of the operation was to pass to the London Passenger Transport Board in 1933 when that was formed. Maidstone and District motor buses replaced Chatham and District trams in 1930 after taking over the company in 1929. The Chatham and District tramway system was started in 1902. The bus operating arm, which was the Chatham and District Traction Company, operated as a subsidiary in its own separate brown livery until 1955. In 1935, the company acquired the Hastings Tramways Company, which had operated trolleybuses since 1928. The trolleybuses themselves were replaced by motor buses in May 1959. In 1942, the company reverted to British Electric Traction Control. In the brief period between World War II and when Bristol was nationalised, there weren't many BET operators who actually bought Bristol chassis. However, Maidstone and District was one of them. And indeed, when Bristol was nationalised, they had some orders outstanding. So we have the curious sight of a Bristol LL5G, which had been delivered in 1950 and had 39-seat Eastern Coachworks bodywork. And this was one of a batch of 15 delivered. And by all intents and purposes was a proper Tilling vehicle, just not in a Tilling livery. Very strange. In the post-war years, Maidstone and District did operate a very varied fleet, with chassis being provided by Leyland, Daimler, AEC and Bristol. Later on in 1955, when Chatham and District was absorbed into Maidstone and District, Guy Arabs would also enter the fleet, although some of the guys were transferred over before this. However, these were all on front-engined chassis. When the launch of the Leyland Atlantean, the rear-engined double-decker bus, came in 1958, Maidstone and District went for it in a big way. In fact, one of the first Atlanteans built was exhibited at the 1958 Motor Show, and it was a low-bridge bus for Maidstone and District, 43 DKT, and this would be the first of 14 buses which were bodied by Wayman. Also at the motor show was RTH 637, which was for James of Amanford in South Wales, Wallasey Corporation FHF 451, and Glasgow Corporation FYS 998, better known as LA1. And it's almost like the Maidstone and District bus has been overshadowed by the other three buses, and it's a shame that it wasn't preserved. The other three buses have survived in preservation, but 43 DKT sadly didn't. Interestingly, at the motor show there was orders announced for over 200 Atlanteans, all with MCW bodywork, and Maidstone and District alone took 50 of them. 36 were high bridge and 14 of them were low bridge. And many of these would be used to replace the trolley buses in Hastings. By 1962, Maidstone and District would have the largest fleet of Atlanteans in the country, with more than 100 having been delivered within 3 years. Along with Ribble, Maidstone and District were also early operators of coach-seated Atlanteans. They ordered two 60-seaters that featured air suspension at the front. But unlike the Ribble ones that were painted in a special eye-catching livery, these featured the standard dark green and cream livery of the normal buses. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, I will be doing a separate video on the Ribble Leyland Atlanteans, but I will also do part of this on these two Maidstone and District buses because they've got quite an interesting history, and again they tend to be overlooked and overshadowed by the Ribble Gay Hostesses and the White Ladies. The company also went in for having double-deckers rebodied, and a lot of the Guy, Bristol, Daimler wartime utility double-deckers were rebodied with mostly Wayman bodies. In 1963, Maidstone and District started taking Daimler fleet lines, as this allowed them to operate a low height rather than a low bridge bus, and reintroduce Gardner engines back into the fleet. These were bodied by Northern Counties. The single-decker fleet was a little bit more standardised, with mostly being AC reliances. However, there were some quirks, such as some Albion Nimbuses that the company took, as well as Leyland Panthers. Later on, in between batches of Leyland Leopards, the company would also receive 30 single-decker Daimler fleet lines with bodywork by Marshall. As with all the other bus companies belonging to BET Group and indeed Tilling, on the 1st of January 1969 they passed into the ownership of the National Bus Company. And although initially there was very little change visible, after a short while National Bus Company leaf green livery started to displace the classic dark green and cream livery of Maidstone and District. Maidstone and District went for the Leyland National in a big way and built up quite a large fleet of them, along with Bristol VRs, including the rarer 14'6" variants. During the 1970s, the relationship between East Kent and Maidstone and District became very close, and indeed the two companies were run from the Station Road West offices of East Kent Road Car Company in Canterbury, although as far as I know the legal lettering was never actually changed. Now, one story that I've heard was that the companies of East Kent and Maidstone and District were going to merge, and the new company would be called Northdown. So what do you think on that? What's your opinion? Do you think this would have happened, or do you think it's something that just was hypothetical? It's very interesting to speculate about it because both fleets were totally different, weren't they? For one, East Kent had continued to buy front-engined forward entrance double-decker buses, the AC Regents, and only really dallied with a smallish batch of Daimler fleet lines, whereas Maidstone and District went for the rear-engined Atlanteans and fleet lines in a big way. And then, of course, there's the question of what colour would they have used? Would they have been a red fleet or a green fleet? Oh, and incidentally, if you're wondering why those big fleet numbers appeared on the domes of all the Maidstone and District buses, it's because the bus station at the Pentagon Shopping Centre in Chatham was controlled by CCTV, and they needed these fleet numbers on the roof domes of the buses so they could be seen in the cameras. During the National Bus Company years, Maidstone and District was used for the trials of new or potentially new vehicles for the National Bus Company. During this time, some of the vehicles tested included MCW Scania Metropolitans, Volvo B55 Ailsas, Dennis Dominators, and MCW Metro buses. Maidstone and District was also down for trialling the new TN series Leyland Titan in the late 1970s. However, as we know, delivery delays caused by the problems at Park Royal meant that this order and the trials were subsequently dropped, with the part-built buses being used to furnish a London transport order. As a result of the market analysis project in 1980, the name Hastings and District was brought back into use, and by 1983, Hastings and District had become a separate subsidiary. The separate Hastings and District company adopted a Regency red and cream livery, which looked very smart to be fair. And later on, after a delivery of some Mercedes-Benz minibuses, the fleet livery was changed to blue, cream and chrome yellow. The Hastings and District fleet later passed to Stagecoach, who incorporated it with the Southdown fleet, which then became South Coast buses. And it does get all rather confusing, because in the past, when there's been anniversaries, Stagecoach have painted some of their Hastings-based vehicles in the traditional Maidstone and District livery, even though the main Maidstone and District fleet didn't actually pass to Stagecoach, as we will see in a little while. Also in the early 1980s, Maidstone and District rebranded its commuter services as Invictaway. Initially, the livery chosen was a smart black, however this would show the dirt rather dramatically. So the standard National Bus Company colours were applied in what was called the Venetian blind style livery. In common with a lot of operators who ran it into London, Maidstone and District used these long wheelbase Olympian coaches, with Eastern Coachworks bodywork, and very smart they looked too. On the 7th of November 1986, Maidstone and District was sold to a management buyout. And again, initially there was very little change, apart from the National Bus Company logo being covered over by M&D stickers. Later, however, the National Bus Company leaf green and white was replaced by grass green and cream. Although to begin with, this was applied in the style of the National Bus Company livery. In 1992, Maidstone and District acquired the former Maidstone Corporation and Maidstone Borough Council derived Borough Line. Now, Borough Line had been running tendered services in London for London Regional Transport, but these had already been sold off to Kentish Bus, and some of the newer vehicles in the Borough Line fleet had been repossessed due to a bit of a cash flow crisis. The rather mixed fleet that Maidstone and District inherited from Borough Line was quickly withdrawn and sold. On the 13th of April, lucky for some, Maidstone and District was acquired by British Bus. Now, British Bus also owned neighbouring Kentish Bus, which was formerly London and Country South East. And one of the first things that happened was the Invictaway services were all rebranded as Green Line services. Around this time, a stunning new livery was introduced by Ray Stenning of Best Impressions. This livery featured a scroll that was based very strongly on the original Maidstone and District Motor Services scroll. And I think quite a few people are right when they say this was probably the best livery that Maidstone and District had post-National Bus Company. Or maybe even before the National Bus Company, who knows. However, as we know, things are never straightforward and nothing stays still for long in the post-deregulation bus industry. And Cowie Group was to acquire British Bus and then become Arriva. And the beautiful Ray Stenning livery, and indeed the other green and cream liveries, were all lost beneath a sea of turquoise and stone, or blue and cream as other people would say. Initially known as Arriva Kent and Sussex, it later became Arriva Southern Counties, and by 2013 the once proud Maidstone and District Motor Services fleet name was listed at Companies House as a dormant company. However, this name would later be acquired by an enthusiastic coach company from Norfolk called dogwood coaches. I do hope you enjoyed this brief look at the history of Maidstone and District, and an even briefer look at the history of Hastings and District. I hope you didn't find it all too depressing with the usual "it's been sold to Arriva" or "it's been sold to Stagecoach" ending. One day I will really try to find you a story with a happy ending. But just don't hold your breath. I really appreciate you tuning in to watch my videos, as all money raised goes to the upkeep of the buses from the Southern Counties Omnibus collection. And I indeed actually own 4 former Maidstone and District buses that feature in the Southern Counties Omnibus collection. 3 Bristol VRs, PKE 807M, PKE 809M and WKO 137S, as well as a Leyland Leopard JKM 165V, which was new to Maidstone and District but later passed to Hastings and District. So then there has been absolutely no pressure at all to get this episode absolutely spot on and right, has there? If you did enjoy this video, please like and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss my future releases in this and in my other series here on YouTube. Thank you so very much for watching. Bye for now.